At public high schools, counselors handle about 500 students. At an elite private school, just 50. This single difference changes everything about college admissions. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Cynthia Colon, former college admission officer, TEDx speaker, and author of the book, Be Committed, Get Admitted. I grew up with 14 Theos and Theas with advice on just about everything except for how to get admitted to college. I attended a public school, but it wasn't until I worked at Vassar College that I understood the discrepancy of resources between public and private school students. In this video, I'm going to share with you exactly why I believe it is absolutely ethical to hire a college consultant, especially if you currently attend a public school. Let's get to it. This is a sensitive topic that I have strong feelings about. As someone who's both been a college admission officer at Vassar and I now work as a college consultant, I want to address the elephant in the room. Is hiring a college consultant ethical? Is it cheating? The short answer is no. Not only is it ethical, but for many students, it's about leveling an incredibly uneven playing field. Let me explain. When I began my role as an admission officer for Vassar College, I was given a set of schools that I was to visit. And in the summer, we would make our plans to go and visit different high schools across the country. My particular region, I had all of California, half of Texas, all of Florida, Minnesota, Kansas, and some other states as well. So I got on the phone and started dialing the same list of high schools that my predecessor had also visited. So I did what I was told to do. And then when I got on the road, when I would drive up to these high schools, they looked like mini colleges. Literally, there were guard gates. I would get stopped and have to give my information, and they would give me a pass and direct me to my, preferred parking area. I would arrive at these brick buildings with big columns and manicured lawns. There was a receptionist to greet me, give me a greeting bag full of goodies that water bottle and some snacks to take on the road. And then I was walked down to a hallway to a conference room where there were a number of students waiting for me to hear more about Vassar. It was great to be there because all the students were engaged. They had interesting questions and they wanted to know more about how to get admitted to Vassar. And so it was a win-win. And then afterwards, I would have time, or the counselor would make time to meet with me one-on-one to just share some information and learn about the school, the high school I was visiting, and for me to share a little bit more about Vassar and sort of the updates. It was great. I couldn't feel better about that experience. Now let me share the other type of experience. So when I was making my list of schools of where I would visit, I noticed that there were not very many public high schools on the list. So I added a few public schools and just kind of did it on my own. There was this high school that I remember vividly. I was visiting Northern California in the San Francisco, Oakland area. I remember driving up and thinking, oh, this looks kind of like my own high school where I went to school. And so I went inside and I was like, yay, I don't remember meeting the college counselor, if there was one, but I do remember going into a room. There were two students that were there to meet with me. And it was very clear very quickly that neither of these young women were remotely qualified to be admissible to a place like Vassar. And I don't judge that. I'm glad that they were there. In that moment, I remember thinking, wow, how does this happen? Compared to my other high school visits, there was a room filled with students that were completely qualified. And mind you, this is a public school. The size of this school was at least 4 times of other private schools I would visit. So 2 girls, neither of them qualified. So I decided to just take off my Vassar hat and start to counsel them. Tell me a little bit more about what you're looking at. What is your GPA? And I just gave them some good advice as to where else they should be thinking about applying, and basically try to steer them away from applying to Vassar. I guess my job was to get them to apply, but I just thought I'm doing them a disservice by putting them in that position. So I remember very clearly that season that I would start to journal about all the things I was noticing, what was happening at the private school level and what kind of advice they were given and what kind of expectation they had versus the public school. It was the first time that I guess I reflected on my own public school experience and was glad that my mom at some point asked for help from Mr. Raul Vargas and that I was lucky enough to get that help and take it to get to my dream college. So in a way, I was sort of doing that same thing for those 2 girls in that moment. And I didn't know that at the time, but Anyway, still a beautiful memory. What most people don't realize is that the disparity goes beyond just the buildings. And what I was seeing and watching as an anthropologist or a sociologist while I was an admission officer, I would later understand when I worked at Marymount. These private high schools that I was visiting, they had a curriculum, they had built-in systems, they had this sort of the mindset. I mean, it was never a question of like, if you're going to college. The question was, where are you going to college? They started talking to parents and students alike in freshman year. So again, these were things that I sort of was observing, but when I worked at Marymount, I was the one implementing this kind of curriculum. I was the one giving behind the scenes strategies. I was the one giving hot tips for all the girls so that they could maximize their choices in getting admitted to top 100 college and Ivy League schools. That's the expectation at an elite private school. That is just not the expectation at a public school. With that said, when I switched over and pivoted to being the director of college counseling at Marymount, again, there we had a student to counselor ratio of 50-1. There were about 100 girls per class, and there were 2 college counselors to serve that one class, on top of 4 guidance counselors, 1 for each grade level, for a school of 400. Okay, so there were 6 counselors for a school of 400 girls versus a public school that typically 1 counselor handles 500 students. Very, very different. So I want you to just think about that. No matter how talented a counselor is, how can 1 counselor really manage and give the due time that every senior needs who's applying to college? It's like nearly impossible. In fact, I would say it is impossible. So that's a huge difference in discrepancy of resources between public and private high schools. It was somewhere in my time at Marymount that I again went back to my journaling from my Vassar days and continued to journal about what I was doing at the private school level. And all of these things, all of these journal entries at the end of the day turned out to be my book, which I have now. But it was always eye-opening to me at the end of a week in a fall of senior year, what we had accomplished and how many students we had served in just 5 days. And I thought, there's no way, even when I was a student, like there was no way that I was getting this kind of attention that I was able to give the girls at Marymount. I learned so much by serving those girls and what they needed so that I can pass that on to every student across the country. Here's another big difference. Families that choose to send their children to private independent schools, they are paying somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 plus to send their children there, right? In Los Angeles, I think the average is about $40,000 a year for a private independent school. And I think in New York, it's probably $60,000 or more a year. With that comes resources. But it goes beyond just being able to give students the time and attention, 10x the time and attention that you would normally find at a public school. It's really about the expertise. When it comes to the college counselors that are hired to work at private independent schools, many of them come from working at top 100 colleges. So there's the expertise factor. I can tell you the year that I was hired to come to Marymount, there were a number of openings at a number of different private high schools. And my colleagues had come from Caltech, they'd come from UPenn, they came from Villanova, me from Vassar. All of us were coming from top colleges, and we bring that expertise and that behind the scenes strategies to the school that we're working at. That's a huge advantage. On the other hand, at public high schools, the college counselors, they're more generalist and not specialist. And the difference there is that by and large, most of those counselors have not had the college admission experience to the level that we've had, if they've had it at all. I dare say the great majority of public school counselors, guidance counselors, school counselors, college counselors have not worked on the other side of the desk on the admission process. So that right there is a huge disadvantage. Again, no judgment, it is what it is, but that's a huge disadvantage, where at the private school, it's a huge advantage to have the level of expertise that someone like me can bring to the table. Okay, let's talk about writing. The reason I like to talk about writing is because in the college application process, a huge component of the application is all about writing, submitting your personal statement and supplemental essays. It's a lot about reflecting on who you are and then being able to write about it. So let's talk about the writing situation. At a public school, English teachers have somewhere between 30 and 40 students per class. When you multiply that by teaching 5 or 6 classes, it becomes nearly impossible for any teacher to want to assign a 3-page paper to all of her or his students. Why? Because the time it would take to read all of those essays and give proper feedback, it would take weeks, maybe months to get that kind of feedback to a student. That is why many students have not even written as much as 3 full pages by the time they graduate from a public high school. And you take that and you compare that to what I experienced. In freshman year, students were writing 3-page papers, 3 to 5-page papers. So freshman, sophomore year, they're building blocks and they're really getting great at writing. But by the time they're juniors and seniors, you better believe they've written 10-page papers, 15-page papers, research papers. They have honed their skill of writing over time with teachers who give them proper feedback along the way. Again, is it ethical to get some help? Yes, it's about leveling the playing field at every step of the way, because most public school students have a disadvantage just at the get-go before they've even hit submit. So when people ask me, is it ethical to get help? I turn that question around and say, is it ethical for someone else to get 10 times more guidance, expertise, writing practice along the way just because they attend a private school? This isn't about giving an unfair advantage. It's about trying to close the gap that already exists. I want you to think about it this way. Parents often invest in tutors or athletic training or academic support. No one ever questions, is it ethical to get SAT tutoring or join a club team to improve your athletic skills? College consulting is no different. It's really about getting the expert advice that you deserve just so you can compete fairly. I want you to always keep in mind this crucial statistic. For every applicant pool, 60 to 80% of that applicant pool are all equally academically qualified. Getting admitted isn't just about grades. It's about how you present yourself, how you tell your story, and how you stand out from the crowd. And this is the component that public school students need the most help and the most guidance along the way to get this piece right. So here's the bottom line. If you're trying to get admitted to top 100 colleges that admit under 30%, getting advice and guidance isn't just ethical, it's often the very thing you need to help level the playing field. Think of it this way. You wouldn't try to make the Olympic team without getting a coach, right? So why would you choose not to get a coach with something so critical as getting admitted to a college that has the potential to change the trajectory of your life and those who follow behind you? I like to end by asking this question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how helpful did you find this video? Comment below, 1 being this was terrible and 10 being super helpful. I also want you to comment below on how you feel about this. What are some things that you want me to address that hit home these ethical issues that so many are unwilling to tackle? If you found this perspective helpful in any way, please be sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell so that we can stay connected. And let me know in the comments other ethical questions that you have about the college admission process. I'll be sure to address them. All right, that's all I have for you today. Be committed, get admitted, and until next time, wherever you are, make it a happy and sunny day. Bye for now.